They stripped her dignity in front of a full courtroom, laughed at her wheelchair, mocked her scars, and called her silver star a prop. The corrupt judge thought she was just a woman playing soldier. But Skylar Monroe wasn't just another disabled Navy SEAL. She was the reason his nephew was still alive. And when the truth came out, the entire courtroom didn't just go silent. It stood at attention. Because you don't get to humiliate a hero and walk away. You don't get to bury the truth when it wears a uniform. Please support us by subscribing to the channel and drop a comment to let us know where you're watching from. The grand stone pillars of the Portwell Federal Courthouse rose like ancient sentinels as Skylar Monroe guided her wheelchair up the smooth accessibility ramp. There was a quiet discipline in her every motion, precise, practiced the ghost of a past that most people in that courtroom would never imagine she'd lived. The salty morning breeze drifted in from the bay, brushing her face like a whisper from another life, one filled with fire, gunmetal, and sacrifice. She closed her eyes for just a moment, remembering the smell of the jungle, the tension in the air before breaching a compound. Then she let it go. That wasn't today's battle. Balanced carefully in her lap was a weathered manila folder inside, evidence. Proof that several tactical vests made by Ironmark Industries had failed. Vests that should have stopped standard rounds. Vests that didn't. People had died. As she entered the lobby, Skylar noticed the quiet weight of stares, some familiar, from men and women with the same 1,000-yard gaze of service. Others, cold and skeptical. The courtroom would be full today. A young attorney stepped forward, extending his hand nervously. "Ms. Monroe, I'm Elliot Whitley. Thank you for being here." Skylar took his hand gently. "I never left the fight." Courtroom 3 was already buzzing by the time Skylar Monroe reached it. Reporters huddled near the door like vultures circling a battlefield. Military personnel stood in small groups, some in uniform, others like her, dressed in plain clothes but carrying themselves with the unmistakable air of service. Their eyes followed her, not with recognition, but with that unsettling curiosity reserved for those who don't quite fit the mold. Skylar took her place near the prosecution table, her dark navy blazer fit like armor, her service medals tucked away, except for one, a small silver star pinned quietly to her lapel. She didn't flaunt it, she never had. But she wore it today because truth needed a spine, and this was hers. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Preston Blackwell," the bailiff announced. The room stood, all but Skylar. Judge Blackwell entered with theatrical gravity, silver-haired, stone-faced, his black robe swaying as he approached the bench. His piercing eyes scanned the room and froze, just for a moment, on Skylar. There was something there, recognition, maybe, or was it resentment? "Be seated," he said coldly. Opening arguments came and went. Ironmark's attorney, Thaddeus Merrick, made his entrance with the smug confidence of a man who'd never heard the word no and didn't expect to hear it today either. His voice was smooth, practiced. "This is a witch hunt," he declared. "My client, Ironmark Industries, has served the U.S. military honorably for over 30 years. This is about bureaucratic red tape, not battlefield performance." Then, Prosecutor Whitley stood and said the name that shifted the energy in the room. "The prosecution calls Ms. Skylar Monroe to the stand." The air grew heavy. All eyes turned. Skylar moved forward with steady hands, guiding her wheelchair to the stand without assistance. She didn't want help, not from a bailiff, not from anyone. She was done being underestimated. "State your name and occupation for the record," the court clerk asked. "Skylar Monroe," she said clearly, "military equipment analyst, civilian contractor." Merrick was already on his feet. "Your Honor, we challenge the witness's qualifications." Blackwell didn't hesitate. "Proceed." And just like that, the deconstruction began. Each time Whitley tried to establish her authority, her training, her field work, her combat experience, Merrick objected. And every time, Blackwell sustained. "Ms. Monroe," Merrick said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Exactly what makes you qualified to evaluate elite tactical gear used by our nation's special forces. Skylar didn't blink. First-hand use. Under fire. First-hand. As what? A clipboard holder behind the wire. Laughter rippled across the defense bench. In operational environments, she answered calmly. Blackwell leaned forward. Ms. Monroe, you speak as if you had military command, yet you appear before this court as a civilian. Whitley attempted to interject, but the judge raised his hand sharply. Sit down, counselor. Skylar kept her voice level. Your Honor, my full credentials are classified. I'm only authorized to speak to the performance of the equipment. Blackwell narrowed his eyes. This court does not operate on secrets. If you can't verify your background, your testimony may not be credible. Merrick pounced. Exactly. Without documentation, her opinion is speculative at best. As the questioning continued, Skylar spotted a figure entering the gallery. Distinguished, decorated, Admiral Julian Whitaker, former commander of Naval Special Operations. He made eye contact, nodded once. His presence wasn't a coincidence. Still, Merrick pressed. Did you ever use the Ironmark X7 tactical vest in live combat? Yes. And you claim it failed? It didn't stop a round, it was rated to stop. 3 service members died as a result. And what mission was this, he asked, smiling like a shark. She hesitated. That information is... Let's talk about this then, Blackwell interrupted, his voice sharper. That pin on your lapel. You're aware impersonating a decorated veteran is a federal crime. The room fell dead silent. I am not impersonating anyone, Skylar said. Then explain the Silver Star. It was awarded to me, sir. Merrick scoffed. You expect us to believe that a woman in a wheelchair earned one of the military's highest honors. Objection, Whitley barked. Blackwell ignored him. Remove the pin, Miss Monroe, before I hold you in contempt. The room stared. Skylar's hand didn't shake as she removed the pin and set it gently on the wood of the witness stand. The metallic click echoed in the room like a gunshot. Merrick leaned in, satisfied. Blackwell looked pleased. And Admiral Whitaker stood. Your Honor, he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Permission to approach, as an officer of the United States Navy. Judge Blackwell froze for a moment, clearly unprepared for the interruption. State your name and position for the record, he said stiffly. Admiral Julian Whitaker, retired, former commander, Naval Special Operations, the man replied, presenting his ID to the bailiff, who quickly handed it to the judge. And your purpose for addressing this court? Blackwell asked, his voice colder now, defensive. I'm here under direct authorization from the Department of Defense. Due to the inappropriate nature of the questioning and the public challenge to this witness's credibility, I've been granted clearance to submit her full, declassified service record for the court. He pulled a sealed folder from his case, the kind with a bright red top sheet marked confidential. Authorization required. When he broke the seal and placed the documents on the clerk's desk, the room held its breath. Even Blackwell's hands trembled slightly as he received the folder. He opened it slowly. His eyes scanned the pages at first, with indifference, then confusion, and finally a dawning horror that spread visibly across his face. The color drained from his cheeks. Whitley leaned towards Skylar. What's in there? He whispered. She didn't respond. She just watched. Blackwell looked up from the file and stared at her. For the first time that day, his expression wasn't smug, it was stunned. Admiral Whitaker cleared his throat. With your permission, Your Honor, I'd like to summarize the contents of that file for the court. Blackwell didn't speak, he only nodded. Whitaker turned to the courtroom, voice steady and commanding. Skylar Monroe served 11 years with Naval Special Operations. During that time, she completed multiple classified missions, including high-value hostage rescues and frontline extraction operations. She was awarded the Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars with Valor, and a Purple Heart. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom like a rising tide. She was critically wounded during Operation Sentinel Flame an engagement in which she led the extraction of 16 American hostages from an insurgent compound. She sustained multiple gunshot wounds while covering their retreat, and continued to fight until every member of her team was safe. He paused, then added, "One of those 16 lives she saved was Second Lieutenant Nathaniel Blackwell, the judge's nephew." The courtroom gasped, heads turned toward the bench. Judge Blackwell sat motionless, lips parted but silent. Skylar's eyes didn't waver. She didn't smirk. She didn't flinch. She just looked at him calm, unwavering. "Your Honor," Whitaker continued, "this witness has never sought public recognition. She declined multiple interviews, refused a full honors ceremony, and requested that her records remain sealed until today, when her integrity was put on trial instead of the company responsible for faulty equipment." The judge's gavel hit the wood once, but the sound was hollow. "This court will take a short recess," he said, his voice strained. "With respect, Your Honor," Whitaker said, stepping forward once more, "you may want to review the second document. Communications between you and Ironmark executives over the past 18 months. Discussions on how to handle problematic witnesses, including Ms. Monroe." Blackwell's jaw tensed. His hands curled around the edges of the folder. Whitley stood up sharply. "Your Honor, the prosecution formally moves for a mistrial on grounds of judicial misconduct." The courtroom erupted, reporters scrambling, defense attorneys whispering furiously, and the bailiff calling for order. Blackwell looked down, blinking rapidly. "This court is in recess, effective immediately." But Admiral Whitaker's voice rang out again. "Chief Judge Ellery is en route," he said evenly. "You are no longer presiding over this case." The doors opened as if on cue, and Chief Judge Howard Ellery stepped in, flanked by federal marshals. "Judge Blackwell," he said sternly, "you will join me in chambers. Now." As Blackwell stood, he turned to Skylar once more. The contempt was gone. All that remained was recognition of who she was and what she had done for him and his family. He walked out without another word. When the doors closed, the courtroom remained in stunned silence. Skylar reached for the silver star on the witness stand and pinned it back to her lapel with steady hands. Around the room, one by one, uniformed service members rose from their seats and stood at attention. No orders, no commands, just silent respect. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She'd been underestimated for years, doubted, pushed aside. But now, the truth had found its voice, and it spoke through her. The hallway outside courtroom 3 had transformed. Reporters who had once whispered judgments behind Skylar Monroe's back now held microphones like offerings. Cameramen scrambled to catch a glimpse of her face, not for mockery this time, but to capture the woman whose quiet courage had just unraveled a federal judge's career in less than 15 minutes. Skylar moved through the crowd without saying a word. Her hands remained firm on the wheels of her chair, her eyes focused forward. Dignity was not something she wore like armor. It was who she was. "Commander Monroe," someone shouted behind her. She turned slightly. Lieutenant Nathaniel Blackwell pushed through the cluster of onlookers, breathless and shaken, the same young officer she had once dragged bleeding and terrified through the smoke of that compound in Mosul. "Skylar," he said, voice cracking. "Nathaniel," she answered softly. "It's been a while." He stopped short of her chair, guilt written across his face like war paint. "I didn't know," he said. "My uncle, he never told me. I knew someone had saved me that day, but I never knew it was you." "You weren't supposed to," she said quietly. "I wasn't supposed to still be alive." His mouth parted, but words failed him. Finally, he said, "I'm so sorry for what he did to you in that courtroom." She shook her head. "You don't owe me that apology." "He does." Whitley, the young prosecutor, approached from behind with a folder in hand. "Commander, the DOJ is requesting a debrief. You don't have to say your testimony today did more than we could have imagined." She nodded, but her eyes were still on Nathaniel. "I'll meet you in the conference room in 5, she said, then turned back to the lieutenant. Nathaniel's eyes brimmed with emotion. "You could have told them everything. You could have destroyed him." Skylar blinked slowly. This was never about him. It was about the vests that failed, the men who died, and making sure no one ever wears faulty armor again. He looked down, ashamed. Skylar's voice softened. You signed the requisition papers, didn't you? His head snapped up. How did you? I've read every report. I know the paper trail. I also know how green you were back then. You trusted what the contractors told you. I trusted my uncle, he said bitterly. He vouched for Ironmark. He told me it was a political headache I didn't want, so I looked away. And 3 of my men died. You nearly did too. Skylar didn't flinch. You're not the first officer to make a costly mistake, Nathaniel, but you get to choose what you do with it now. I want to testify, he said. When the trial resumes, I'll tell them everything about Ironmark, about Judge Blackwell, about what I saw and what I ignored. That won't be easy, she said. I know, but it's right. She studied him for a moment. There was no more boyish pride in him, only remorse and a hard-earned strength that didn't come from medals. A quiet voice broke their conversation. Commander Monroe, a middle-aged woman, stood nearby, hands clasped nervously in front of her. Her coat was elegant, understated. Her eyes were red. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said. I'm Elaine Blackwell, the judge's wife. Skylar turned to face her. I just wanted to say, Elaine's voice cracked, thank you for saving my nephew's life. We never knew the full story. Ellery never told us. Skylar simply nodded. I was doing my job. No, Elaine whispered. You did far more than that, and I'm so sorry for what he did to you in there. A long silence passed. Then, in a voice both shaky and resolute, Elaine said, I filed for divorce this morning. Skylar raised an eyebrow slightly. I spent too long being silent while he abused his power. Watching today what he became, I realized I don't know that man anymore, but I know this. You showed more honor in one morning than he has in a lifetime. She reached out and gently touched Skylar's shoulder. Thank you. As Elaine walked away, Skylar turned back to Nathaniel, who stood watching in stunned silence. You see, she said gently, the truth has a funny way of making people face themselves. He nodded slowly. I hope I'm ready to face mine. Skylar offered a small smile. Then you've already taken the first step. Just then, Admiral Whitaker appeared at the far end of the hallway, nodding toward the conference room. Skylar took one last look at the courtroom doors, once a place of humiliation, now the beginning of something greater. The tide had turned, and she was no longer the one on trial. 2 weeks later, Skylar Monroe found herself in a place she never imagined returning to Capitol Hill. Gone were the camouflage fatigues and battle maps. In their place suits, security checkpoints, and a conference room full of legislators. Yet somehow, this felt more like enemy territory than any combat zone she'd known. She wheeled into the Oversight Committee chamber as quietly as always. But this time, the air shifted. Staffers whispered. Representatives looked up from their notes. She wasn't just a witness anymore. She was the woman who'd helped unseat a federal judge and expose one of the military's most powerful defense contractors. At the front of the room, Congresswoman Valerie Ortiz stood to greet her. Commander Monroe, she said, shaking her hand firmly. It's an honor. Skylar met her gaze, calm and clear. Appreciate the invitation. Ma'am? You're not here as a witness today, Ortiz said. You're here as a key contributor to the reform process. We've reviewed your reports. Your insights are invaluable. Skylar gave a subtle nod. She wasn't interested in titles. She was here for results. Inside the hearing room, a sea of faces stared back military brass, civilian oversight officials, and behind them, the ever-present press. No sign of Ironmark executives. Most were now under indictment, awaiting trial. No sign of Judge Blackwell. Either he had officially resigned, and whispers of impending federal charges were growing louder. Ortiz opened the session with a firm voice. The events of the last month have forced us to confront a truth. Our military procurement system is broken. Contracts prioritize profits over protection. People died. One of them almost was Commander Monroe. Today, we begin fixing it. Skylar's panel was the first to speak. She was flanked by 2 former procurement officers and a Defense Department whistleblower, but all eyes remained on her. When it was her turn, she didn't read from notes. 3 years ago, she began, I led a mission to extract 16 hostages from a hostile compound. The tactical vests we wore were supposed to stop standard rounds. They didn't. 3 men were killed in seconds. I was hit twice before I realized my vest was compromised. A hush fell over the room. I didn't come here to relive that day, she continued, her voice steady, but to make sure it doesn't happen again. The system failed us. Not because we lacked the technology, but because someone signed off on equipment that looked good on paper, passed lab tests, but failed under fire. What would you propose? Commander asked Representative Greg Maddox, a former Army officer himself. Skylar didn't hesitate. Mandatory field testing for all gear, using real combat units, not lab simulations, independent oversight, not contractors grading their own homework, and consequences. If a CEO knowingly ships faulty armor, that's not a recall issue, that's criminal negligence. A few representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but Ortiz nodded slowly, as if the words were already echoing in her plans. And what about accountability for those who covered it up? Ortiz asked. Skylar's eyes narrowed slightly. That part's already begun. After the session adjourned for recess, Skylar made her way into the hallway. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. A familiar voice called out, softer than the rest. You made quite an impression in there. Skylar turned to see Captain Nathaniel Blackwell in uniform this time, his silver bars freshly pinned. The guilt in his eyes was still there, but now it shared space with resolve. I testified last week, he said. Full disclosure, my role in the requisition process, my uncle's pressure to stay quiet, everything. Skylar raised an eyebrow. That couldn't have been easy. It wasn't, but it was necessary. He paused, then added, They're calling the new policy package the Monroe Protocol. Skylar blinked, without asking me. They wanted to surprise you. She shook her head, almost smiling. I didn't come here to have things named after me. I know, he said. You came to fix what was broken. She glanced back toward the hearing room. Looks like we're just getting started. That night, as the lights of Washington shimmered across the Potomac, Skylar Monroe sat alone in her modest apartment, staring at the folded flag on her shelf. It had once draped the coffin of Commander Aidan Cavanaugh, her team leader and best friend, the man who had covered her retreat on that hellish day in Mosul so she and 16 others, including Nathaniel Blackwell, could live, the man who had whispered, "Get them out," as he bled out in the dirt, still firing. Beside the flag sat her silver star, the Purple Heart, and now newly delivered the Navy and Marine Corps Medal, a delayed recognition, denied years earlier by the very people she had exposed. Irony had a bitter aftertaste. She hadn't asked for any of it. What she wanted, what she still wanted, was justice. Quiet, thorough, undeniable justice. For the ones who didn't come home. For the ones who were still out there, wearing faulty gear, trusting systems built more for contracts than for combat. And yet, something had shifted. For the first time in years, Skylar felt the weight on her chest loosen, not gone, but lighter. Her phone buzzed. A text from Captain Blackwell. Heads up DOD assigning me to help implement the Monroe Protocol across all branches. Guess you're stuck with me. She smiled unexpectedly. For a long time, she'd seen Nathaniel as a symbol of everything broken nepotism, silence, cowardice. But now he was standing up, speaking out, taking the heat. Maybe people could change. Maybe institutions could too. The next morning, Skylar rolled into the Pentagon for a meeting with the Reform Task Force. She expected stone-faced officers and stiff resistance. Instead, they greeted her with respect, not admiration that would have made her uncomfortable, just quiet, professional respect, the kind that said, "We know who you are, and we're ready to listen." Over the next few weeks, Skylar worked harder than she ever had in uniform. She reviewed procurement chains, rewrote testing standards, created anonymous reporting systems for field operators to flag unsafe gear. Every small change felt like a brick laid on a new foundation. But more than the policies, it was the people that surprised her. Whitley, once the uncertain young prosecutor fumbling with folders, was now a fierce advocate for military reform and a friend. Captain Blackwell, formerly a haunted shadow, had become a powerful voice from inside the system. Even Admiral Whitaker, now retired, stayed in touch weekly, mentoring her as she navigated political minefields far more treacherous than war zones. And then there were the letters. Dozens of them. From soldiers. From widows. From parents whose children had worn iron-mark vests and come home safe or hadn't. One message stuck with her the most. "My son died in 2021. They told me it was a fluke. Your testimony proved it wasn't. Thank you for not letting it stay buried." Skylar read that one 3 times, then pinned it next to her flag. She didn't see herself as a hero. Heroes wore capes or dog tags. They didn't sit in hearings and read spreadsheets. But slowly, she began to understand sometimes. Changing a system saved more lives than any rescue ever could. She still missed the field, the adrenaline, the simplicity of knowing who the enemy was. But here, in these rooms filled with red tape and black ink, she was making impact. Real impact. One policy at a time. One reform at a time. One truth at a time. The hearing room was silent. Not the kind of silence that comes from boredom or formality, but the breathless quiet that descends when truth is about to be spoken. Skylar Monroe sat at the head of the table, facing a panel of congressional leaders, military brass, and defense industry watchdogs. Her dark blazer was crisp. The silver star glinted faintly on her lapel. Her posture, even from the wheelchair, was unyielding. Beside her, Congresswoman Valerie Ortiz addressed the room. "Today," she said, "we formally adopt the Monroe Protocol, a legislative mandate that will reform military equipment procurement at its core. It will ensure no American service member wears untested or unsafe gear again." Applause erupted across the chamber. Skylar didn't move. She wasn't here for applause. Ortiz turned to her. "Commander Monroe, we invite you now to deliver your final statement." Skylar adjusted the mic, her voice calm but strong, forged from pain, shaped by duty. 3 years ago, she began, I rolled into a battlefield in northern Iraq, not knowing it would be my last mission on foot. 16 lives depended on my team that day. We got them out, but not all of us came back. She paused, letting the room feel the weight of that sentence. I wasn't the only one hit. Commander Aidan Kavanaugh, my mentor, my teammate stayed behind to cover our exit. He gave his life so we could live, and he died wearing a vest that failed him. A few gasps echoed in the room. That vest, she continued, was manufactured by Ironmark Industries. It had passed every required test, but none of those tests involved real bullets, real heat, real soldiers, real war. She glanced at the panel in front of her. What failed him wasn't just armor. It was a system that rewards shortcuts, that buries field complaints, that silences voices in the name of procurement efficiency. She leaned in, voice quieter but sharper. I'm not here for vengeance. I'm here because I have a responsibility to the people who still serve, and to the families who never got to welcome their sons and daughters home. A Marine colonel sitting behind the committee dabbed at his eyes. The Monroe Protocol is not about me, she said. It's about accountability. It's about the next young lieutenant who signs off on gear, trusting it won't fail. It's about every sergeant who has to tell a mother her son died wearing something that wasn't ready. Skylar's voice cracked just slightly, but she didn't pause. I've served my country on battlefields most people will never see. I've lost friends in places that don't have names. But this courtroom, this city is where the real battle always lived, and for the first time in a long time, I believe we might be winning. Silence hung like reverence. Then slowly, respectfully, the entire chamber rose to their feet. Not for the law, not for the policy, but for her. Outside, cameras waited, questions fired, microphones hovered. Skylar answered only a few. Then, as the crowd dispersed, She wheeled quietly down a side hall, exiting through the lower level of the Capitol. There, beneath an overcast Washington sky, she looked up at the dome of the building where change had finally taken root. Admiral Whitaker appeared at her side, offering a small box. "This came for you." Inside, a handwritten note from the Secretary of Defense. "Thank you for restoring honor to the process." She tucked the note into her pocket without a word. "You did it, Skylar," Whitaker said. She shook her head. "No, we started it. Now it's up to everyone else to keep it moving." She looked down at her lap, where her fingers rested against the armrest of her chair. "I used to think I'd lost everything when I lost my legs," she whispered. "But what I really lost was faith." Whitaker looked at her, brow raised. "And today," she exhaled slow, steady, "I got some of it back." In a world where appearances speak louder than actions, Skylar Monroe was judged by her wheelchair, not her sacrifice. She was doubted, humiliated, and nearly silenced, all while carrying the scars of service that most people would never understand. But the truth, like her, refused to stay quiet. What Skylar teaches us is simple, yet profound honor isn't something you wear, it's something you prove, even when no one believes in you. Courage doesn't always look like a soldier charging into battle. Sometimes, it looks like a woman in a courthouse, holding her ground with nothing but the truth on her side. In standing up not for herself, but for those who couldn't, she reminded an entire nation that strength isn't measured in muscle, rank, or reputation, but in integrity. If Skylar's story moved you, subscribe and tap the bell so you won't miss what's next. Share it with someone who needs to hear. Courage doesn't always wear a uniform. Thanks for watching. See you in the next story.